While many people believe the media lied about the election and that they lied about the process in general, Americans should know that the Trump effect was not just an American phenomenon. This recent protest vote was preceded by the Brexit vote in the UK, and more recently the Italian Renzi reform vote that has given us a front row seat to smash-mouth politics. Ladies and gentlemen, change is upon us here and now. What will happen now if we set our sights too low? What will happen if we set them too high? Will we be able to keep up with the worldly trends of this reversing of years of stale agendas and weak political promises? It will be clearer sooner than later that we will need things like fusion energy, maybe Trump's planned infrastructure program, maybe the Bering Strait tunnel. We will have to decide how we can manage the enormity of change right here and right now. And I have with me the policy committee spokesperson?
Sure.
How's that work? For the LaRouche movement, and this, what's the name of the movement? I'm sorry, it's
LaRouche PAC.
PAC, okay. Diane, Sare.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so real quickly, just a little history, just a couple of minutes maybe on what LaRouche is so that the audience knows, and then we'll go right into all this stuff.
Okay, sure. Well, many of your listeners are probably familiar with Lyndon LaRouche. People in politics know he's been around for years. He first ran for president back in 1976.
I remember that, yeah.
Ran in every election up through 2004. And in 1980, became part of the Ronald Reagan administration. And they were involved in collaborating on a number of projects, all of which I think are not known. The main one that is known is what became under Ronald Reagan the Strategic Defense Initiative, the idea of a laser defense against nuclear missiles, which he announced in 1983. So that was LaRouche's policy. And Reagan asked LaRouche to be his back channel negotiator with the then Soviet Union.
I remember that.
Yes.
Gorbachev, I think it was Gorbachev.
Yes, Andropov, Gorbachev. And the intent was that the US and the Soviet Union would develop this defensive system simultaneously, and you could put an end for once and for all to Henry Kissinger's mutual and assured destruction. And Reagan really got that. If you remember,
They called it Star Wars.
Yeah, that's what the media called it, to get everyone all hyped up and scared.
Yeah, it worked.
Well, it brought down the Berlin Wall.
Yeah.
You know, which was one
effective,
of. Yeah, you asked about LaRouche's forecast. When I first met this organization, because in 1983, I'm not sure I was the voting age, actually. No, I wasn't. So at any rate, I was not active in this organization when that occurred.
Right.
And I was a college student in the later 80s when LaRouche was running for president in 1988. And as a result of his work with Reagan and some of his other work with President Lopez Portillo in Mexico, Indira Gandhi in India, to reorganize the global financial system, they ran a very targeted witch hunt to frame him up and put him in prison, largely led by the Bush family side of things. So at any rate, what happened in '88 was LaRouche was running for president. They were trying to frame him up in Boston. I was a student at New England Conservatory of Music. And LaRouche went to Berlin, October 1988, and he said, the Soviet Union is going to disintegrate, they're bankrupt, and we should take steps toward the reunification of Germany. And everyone thought, that is a really odd thing to say. In other words, this was not a common view.
Doesn't seem so odd anymore.
No, a year later the Berlin Wall came down, and then Germany was reunified.
Right.
But he, one, had, of course, inside knowledge given his negotiations and work with the Soviet Union, you know, under Reagan, and being a physical economist, he knew you don't measure economy through money. You measure in terms of physical productivity.
That's different. You want a physical economist versus
right.
any other.
Correct. It's a big difference, and it gets at what we're discussing about Trump and really where we are, which I really want to get to, because we are in a revolutionary moment. I mean, like the Berlin Wall coming down, at that time, LaRouche and his wife said, okay, the communist system failed, but don't think that that means the free trade British Empire system has succeeded. And they said the Soviet Union, this is disintegrating now, but the transatlantic system is going to collapse later, and it's going to be a much bigger collapse. And that is where we
That's what's happening kind of like now.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Exactly.
And I even see some weakening in the material you sent me about the Asian area forming unification systems where in conversations they didn't have before.
Correct.
The South Korea, Japan, and China.
Yes, exactly. No, I mean, it's completely extraordinary, and Americans largely don't have a clue about this. So I brought a prop because I just want to remind people what they were thinking before the election. And this is an ad. This was in the New York Times. An ad for
you got
Netflix.
This done?
The Queen. Now, this ad was on the cover of the New York Times on Wednesday, November 9th, the day after the elections. Now, just open it up there. This is the day after the election. Okay, I'll read it or you can read it. We have a new leader, a woman. Let us give her a celebration that is befitting of the wind of change she represents, modern and forward-looking. Okay, so it's supposedly an ad for a series on Queen Elizabeth, but it was timed for a Hillary Clinton victory.
The 9th, which the 8th was the election
Correct.
day. Yeah.
Now, how much does it cost to buy this in the New York Times? So they were so...
Okay, you got it?
They were so spectacularly off. And my colleague, Dennis Speed, who you've had on before, he said, which I thought was very funny, he said all these protesters who were funded by George Soros who were saying, you know, this is so terrible, we're protesting Trump, we're against hate, and I mean, they didn't even know what they were protesting, and a lot of them were paid. He said, what they're really enraged about is they can't figure out why they were wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Right? They were wrong. Now, how could they be so wrong? And that gets to...
I wrote an article about the education in this area missing from the collegiate area, that there's not enough civil education on the college level, and the kids are just kowtowed and just treated like as if we're going to move you along, just pay the bill. And they're not really getting a good education anymore.
Well, no, they're not getting education. And also, you have a so-called narrative. This is the new lingo.
Yeah.
Your narrative.
Yeah.
So
What's
forget
the
it.
narrative?
There's no such thing as truth, which
That's
is
right.
also why this thing about the so-called fake news is so ridiculous.
Yeah.
What is real news? There is no, I mean, this is
because
the
the
New York
perception
Times.
can vary, and they're talking about perception, and perceptions vary.
Of course, of course. So what you had is people deluded by the narratives that they themselves had created, when what you had in the United States and what you had in Britain and Europe is a collapse of the physical economy. So how do you measure economy? And what LaRouche coined uniquely as the metric for economic value and success, it has a very long name. It's called relative potential population density.
How'd you remember that? Cute.
And what that means is, at a given level of technology, how many people could you potentially sustain per square kilometer or square mile?
In a narrative?
No, it's the real world. So you take an example. Suppose we don't have nuclear power, we don't have coal, we have to survive on burning wood. Well, how many people, if you have to burn wood to heat your house, to cook, how much of a land area is it going to take to sustain a family of 4?
It's an odd way to,
Right?
Yeah.
Well, suppose you have a coal-fired power plant. Now, all of a sudden, you can have maybe 100 people where you could only have 4 people. And if you develop more and more dense forms of energy, what happens is you can apply this energy to the earth, to your resources, and you can convert things that used to be considered waste into raw materials. So this is the reason, for example, to develop nuclear fusion, because it's a very, very dense form of energy. I mean, the sun is a giant fusion reaction, for example.
The green people are against that, right? The green America.
Well, some of them are saying they're for it because it doesn't have radioactive waste and because it doesn't have carbon emissions. But largely they're against it because the whole environmentalist movement is a fraud.
Right.
Because they're not about saving the environment, they're about reducing the population. Right, so what LaRouche is saying is that the way you measure economic success is if you are doing those things that allow the future generations to be larger, to have more people per square mile, and at a higher standard of living. Well, how do you measure that? Life expectancy, education, culture, lack of diseases, infant mortality, right? In other words, if you were sane, what you would hope is that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren would be better than you.
Of course, yeah.
Right? And that's what economics is actually about. So now take that as a standard and look at the United States. So what have we had in the last 16 years? And there's been studies done that came out of Princeton University recently. They did a study on non-Hispanic, basically Caucasian men between the ages of 35 and 55. And they found a spectacular increase in the death rate. And what was the cause of this increase? Drug overdose, alcoholism, heart attacks. In other words, diseases of stress, diseases of economic hardship, diseases of despair.
Which is clearly exists.
Exactly.
It's all around us, yeah.
They concluded that 500,000 Caucasian males in this age bracket between the year 1998 and 2014 had died unnecessarily. Had we actually had a productive economy moving in the right direction, 500,000 people would likely still be alive today. I think that's an incredible indictment of the Bush and Obama administrations, and the acceleration of the death rate took off massively under the Obama administration. It had begun, after 9/11 really largely, but it really exploded after Obama took office.
Cancer seemed to be on the rise there for a while. I'm not sure it still is, but they say that's a stress-related disease too.
Could be.
Could be.
I mean,
besides heart attacks, which always were in that realm.
So what you have is a population which is being killed, and people know it, and there is a principle, there's a poetic principle. Shelley writes about it, Percy Bysshe Shelley, in his essay, A Defense of Poetry, and Friedrich Schiller writes about it, the poet of the Ode to Joy and Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and William Tell, that there's a certain point where people won't submit to slavery any longer. They won't submit to those conditions.
You think this is the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've come to this moment. Was there a mass outpouring because people loved Donald Trump? Some people did, but what was it really? They hated Hillary Clinton, and they hated what she represented, and they saw her as the establishment. Who was going to be in her cabinet? It was all these neocons from the Bush administration, the people who have given us 15 years of unbroken war.
I always wondered, you categorizing the two administrations that preceded this particular one that's going to go forward, and I wonder how do they feel about this characterization? Because great answer. Well, I'm just wondering, they were trying to be president. They were trying to be, and they never got there. None of them, neither side got there.
Right.
And no one was a rich person. He's not a no one, but he certainly did make a major impact on the voting public.
Right. Well, there are a couple things that were key. One, ironically, is enough, and all these silly people who are saying this is all about hate and whatever, Trump was seen and is, and he is anti-war. I mean, you think about the speeches he's just given on his thank you tour.
The left is saying that he's putting all these big, beefy Army and Marine-like killer-type people. That's the feedback I'm getting so far.
The people he's appointing are quite extraordinary. General Flynn, the National Security Advisor, was fired by Obama. The guy was a Democrat. He was appointed by Obama as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And he got in a fight because he said, "You're arming ISIS." You're going to create a terrorist mess.
I remember that. I remember that.
Yes, so he was fired. He is now calling for a Marshall Plan for Syria. People are upset about refugees. Well, don't destroy their countries. Don't blow up their countries and support people who are going to chop their heads off, and maybe they won't want to leave their country. Well, how can conditions be created where people would like to go back to Syria? Because I think most people, I certainly wouldn't want to run to a country where I didn't speak the language and I didn't know the culture. And
I interviewed Lee Zeldin, who's the congressman out here on the East End, and he won again, by the way, which I'm glad to hear. But he had said that the best place to take the refugees is settle them in their own country.
Of course, but you have to create conditions to do that, right? So that Flynn is very clear, and this General Mattis, who I don't know that much about, but what strikes me about him is he is a serious intellectual. Apparently he carries 6,000 books around with him or something like that, and has a library of 70,000. And he said you read because you don't want to repeat the mistakes of history, and you particularly don't want to do it with other people's lives.
Right, yeah. We still have another 6 or 7 minutes to go, but I want you to go with this. I want you to do what you wanted to do, because we had talked about this before, and there's a lot of material here, I think, that is very meaningful to what I was reading in the opening about this is our time. So many things are changing now. So
great, thank you.
Yeah,
because I really want to.
I want you to get to this.
We are in an extraordinary moment,
right?
And you see it globally. You already referenced the Brexit, what happened in Italy. People are voting against war with Russia. All over the world. In Europe, they're electing candidates who want to work with Russia, who want to eradicate ISIS.
Which is hard for a lot of people to get here in this country. They don't get that, but go ahead.
Yes. Now, so Trump has called for this $1 trillion infrastructure proposal. And Wilbur Ross, they have some ideas about how to do it. They will not work. You cannot have a public-private partnership. You cannot do it based on toll roads.
I was hoping you could, without the tolls.
No, or airports. What you want to do, if you get back to this thing I said about the population density, is you want to raise the entire platform. So you don't just want to think about a port here, a tunnel there, a bridge there. You want to say, like what FDR did with the Rural Electrification Administration, where you transform the entire society. A farm with electricity is a totally different farm than one that doesn't have it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, and an ability to move your goods on, say, high-speed rail that goes 300 miles an hour as opposed to 40 miles an hour, it changes.
It's going to change everything.
Exactly. So what we have to do is the things that are big, that are beyond our reach. It is not going to transform the economy just to fill in the potholes. Not that we shouldn't, but what you want to do is...
We have to fill the potholes.
Yeah, exactly. You want to set objectives that are way beyond where you are now. Like Kennedy's saying, we're going to send a man to the moon and bring him safely back to Earth.
Right, that was a big statement, yeah.
And think about what that did for Long Island.
Yeah.
I mean, think about Brookhaven, think about all of
Grumman.
Yes, everything here that were feeders into the space program, and also churned out all these new technologies that, again, it lifted the entire platform of the economy. So that's what has to be done.
And we're going to do that here. Go ahead, keep going.
Well, it has to be done, and the only way you can do it is to look at what Alexander Hamilton did. With the Treasury, you need federal credit. You're going to need a tax system to repay it, but it's not going to be onerous and unjust like what you were just discussing with these tickets or things like that. In other words, people are being taxed now for nothing. You're being taxed to bail out Wall Street.
That's right.
Right? But if you're employed making a decent wage and there's a tax on gasoline or various things...
It's going to hurt me.
Well, now it is, but if it's actually used to do things where you suddenly become 10 times more productive than you are...
Then I'm for it.
Yeah, because it raises the entire...
Those are business owner conscious people who would get that.
Yeah, and who think about the future. So you may incur a debt initially, but you know what you're generating in the future is multiple times greater than the debt that you're incurring.
When you grow, you have to hire people. That's how it's going to generate.
Yeah, and skilled people. And the people have to become better because the kind of jobs you're creating are high technology.
And they're different, yeah.
Yeah. You will have no more drug legalization. If you're going to have a fusion-based economy with people traveling to outer space and learning, curing diseases. Do you want people on pot
Yeah.
who are doing that? In other words, it
Right.
just transforms everything.
And these things are basically gonna. There are people who with mindsets who can't see that. They can't see what you're saying. And I think I mentioned to you when I was on the phone, it's big. It's bigger than I can wrap a lot of my head around, because I tend to do what a lot of other people do, join one side or the other and see what works and see if I can figure out, a happier day ahead of me,
Right.
But this makes a lot of sense to me, that if you think small, you can't see that.
Correct. And
So
we don't
we
really
want to advantage the viewer here, so we want the viewer to know that what you're saying is the greater possibility, and it's happening now by these elections, these European, the Brexit and all and the Renzi, and also the Trump election and the Asian connection. These are all very
and
important
the key
things.
is for the U.S. to work with China. I hate to tell our American listeners now, but China leads the world in science, in space.
Right.
It's too bad. We shouldn't hold a grudge against them because they did it. It's natural. We shut it down.
That's right. We shut it down. That's
Exactly.
right. I know. I'm aware of that.
Exactly.
I wrote an article about that.
They did. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Chinese want to work with us because we have the best safety record in the world. We're good. I mean, when we fund NASA, when we do this, we are good. We're like the best in the world.
Right.
So they want to work with us. Our astronauts are not even allowed to talk to the Chinese right now. It is so crazy. So that's going to be a crucial part of the partnership. And Trump had a very good talk with Xi Jinping when he won the election.
A couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's great potential for this.
And what do you see that, for instance, your organization is doing now? What can you do now to help continue this road?
Well, what I'm doing here today, I think the main thing is we have to inspire people. We have to give Americans a vision of a better world that we could be living in a much shorter time than they imagine.
I'm inspired because I haven't heard of it put this way, but I'm surprised that I haven't heard it put this way. It disappoints me that what you're saying comes new to me. And I'm thinking that the people who watch this program are saying the same thing. And I'm hoping that what you've said will at least kick the burners in to help move the existing political parameter we're dealing with now, move it, help move it, or help join it, or accentuate it in any way that they can, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, we have another minute or two. Is there anything else you want to say before we zip out here?
I would say that the first step in the Congress on reorganizing the economy is the reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act.
Oh, thank you for remembering that.
Yes,
Good.
and there are bills in both the House and the Senate which will have to be reintroduced. The House bill will have to be reintroduced in January when we have a new Congress. Both bills
Could
will
you
have
do a minute on what it was? It started,
33.
40 years ago? 1933.
33
Yeah.
under FDR, Glass-Steagall separated commercial from investment banking.
And that did what?
What it meant is that the savings and loan banks did that and nothing else, which is why the FDIC would guarantee your deposit with them.
Right.
And the investment banks were not supposed to be guaranteed. This wasn't, oh, you lose all your money and we give you a bailout.
Right.
Right. And what happened is that it was repealed in '99 under Bill Clinton, and Citibank was the one, they broke the law and rewrote the law after the fact. And
It's a confusing time for me to understand
yeah, so
that.
now what they can do is they can use your deposits as collateral for their gambling. There's no firewall. And what Dodd-Frank means is bail in, which means that they can take your deposits to bail out their derivatives obligations. So
It's wacky world.
It's insane. So we need Glass-Steagall back as a first step, because in order to organize any kind of recovery, you have to have a solvent commercial banking system. And if people want to gamble and they want to bet on the weather and all the derivatives and all the other
That's
stuff,
a different story.
yeah, go somewhere
Go
else.
somewhere else.
Yeah, and you win, you lose, and don't come to me to get a bailout and a bonus because you lost billions of dollars of someone else's money.
Diane, thank you very much. Diane Sare of LaRouche PAC, and you are the policy committee individual who shares all this information out to the public. I hope you've enjoyed this program. You've been watching Gray Matters, a program that shines the light on the society we live in. We keep you in touch with current events, political and hot-button issues of the day, bringing you right into the examination room. We measure the path and the distance that got you where you are today. We can all use a dose of perspective, and this is the best place to get it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next week.